Hello, and welcome back to a world long forgotten, a world sleeping in the deepest layers of stone and time. To journey here, we must first quiet our minds and adjust our sense of scale. The time we are entering is not measured in the familiar beats of a human heart, but in the slow, patient pulse of a planet. It is a rhythm so slow that the entirety of human civilization, from the first stone tool to the brightest city light, would be less than a single, fleeting breath. Let the noise of your world fade. Let the rush of your thoughts soften into a gentle current. We are going back to the very beginning, to a time when the earth itself was still dreaming of what it would become. Its consciousness, a slow, geological meditation. We are going to the Archean, an ocean of time, so vast and still that our own history is but a single grain of sand on its endless shore. Let us float in that stillness together now. Let us drift back, beyond memory, beyond history, to witness the canvas of a world before life had learned to paint it. Imagine, now, opening your eyes for the first time. The first thing you notice is the light. It is everywhere, a gentle, ambient glow that seems to come from the air itself, a light that feels ancient and deeply peaceful. You look up, searching for the sun, searching for the sky, and you find something altogether different. There is no blue. The brilliant, piercing azure of our home is an invention that is still billions of years in the future. Instead, the great vault above is a soft, uniform, and deeply calming orange. It is the color of butterscotch, of warm honey, a soft, hazy gold that stretches from one horizon to the other without interruption. This is the color of the Archean sky. It is the only color the sky has ever known. This strange, beautiful hue is the signature of the air itself. The atmosphere is thick, dense with nitrogen and carbon dioxide, but it is also veiled in a fine, high-altitude haze of methane. Think of the photons, the particles of light, on their 90 million-mile journey from the young sun. They arrive as a cascade of pure, white light. But as they enter this strange, thick air, they are captured. They are scattered and re-dyed, their energy transformed. The haze acts like a filter for the cosmos, stripping away the harsh, energetic blues and violets, and allowing only this soft, gentle, golden light to seep through to the world below. The sky is not a window to the infinite. It is a warm, glowing ceiling, a planetary amber enclosing the young earth in a tranquil, golden room. And the sun, seen through this haze, is not the sharp, brilliant star we know. It is a soft-edged disk, a milky, smudged pearl hanging in the orange stillness. Our sun is younger then, and fainter, its fire not yet at its full strength. Its light does not glare, it does not pierce, it does not cast the sharp, clear shadows of our world. The light feels less like a direct beam and more like a gentle warmth, a presence. It seeps into the world, bathing every surface in a perpetual twilight, a permanent golden hour. This light touches the dark, volcanic rock, not with a sparkle, but with a dull, oily gleam. It falls upon the surface of the great green ocean, shattering into a million points of light, a shattered mirror of liquid gold. Imagine the feeling of this light. There are no sharp contrasts here. The landscape is a masterpiece of subtlety. Every surface, every rock, every quiet shoreline is touched by this serene, honey-colored glow. It is a world without true darkness, only varying shades of a soft and gentle light. A world where everything is held in a state of peaceful, ethereal illumination. a world designed for rest, for contemplation, for the slow, deep work of planetary evolution. Now, as your eyes adjust to this golden calm, you notice another presence in the sky, a silent companion hanging in the orange haze. It is the moon, but it is not the small, distant jewel of our night. It is immense. In this deep past, the moon is still a close neighbor, having only recently been born from the earth itself. It hangs in the sky, huge and detailed, a world in its own right. You can trace the outlines of its great dark seas of cooled lava, the so-called seas of tranquility and rains, and contrast them with the ancient, brighter highlands, cratered by 1 billion years of cosmic impacts. Its presence is a constant, quiet force, a guardian, watching over its parent planet. This giant, silent moon is a reminder of the Earth's own chaotic beginnings, a beautiful scar left over from a time of cosmic violence, now settled into a gentle, gravitational dance. And this dance has a profound effect. The moon's nearness gives it an incredible power over the young planet, a power felt not as light, but as gravity. It is a power that makes the planet breathe. Look towards the horizon, where the land meets the sea. You do not see the familiar chaos of crashing waves and churning surf. Sound on this world belongs to the wind and the rock, not the water. The energy here is more patient, more majestic. Instead, the immense gravitational pull of the giant moon orchestrates a different kind of tide. It pulls on the entire global ocean at once. Twice a day, the whole surface of the sea rises, and twice a day, it falls. This is not a wave, but a silent, synchronous swell, a planetary scale tide that can raise the ocean's level by dozens of meters. A flood without a sound. Imagine watching the shoreline, not over minutes, but over hours. The water advances inland for miles, slowly and inexorably, submerging the low-lying volcanic plains in a quiet, unstoppable deluge. The golden light shimmers on the rising waters as they claim the dark land. And then, just as slowly, it recedes, exposing the glistening, wet rock once more. As the tide pulls back, it leaves behind vast, temporary lakes and shallow seas, and carves ephemeral rivers that exist for only a few hours before the next great breath. It is the planet taking a single deep inhalation, and then a slow, full exhalation. This is the fundamental rhythm of the Archean world, a silent, hypnotic, and deeply peaceful pulse set by the slow dance of a planet and its giant, watchful moon, all bathed in the endless, golden light of a sky you are only just beginning to know. We have seen the sky, the light, and the rhythm of the tides. Now, let us lower our gaze from the heavens and turn our attention to the world itself, the solid ground beneath our feet. The continents of the Archean Earth are not like the green and brown lands of our time. They are vast, dark islands of rock, adrift in a global sea. Imagine standing on one of these primordial shores. There is no sand, no soil, no clay. The very concept of soil, that rich blanket of organic matter and weathered stone, has not yet been invented. You are standing on the bare, naked bones of the planet. It is a landscape of pure geology, fields of black basalt, cooled into strange, pillowed shapes from ancient lava flows, great massifs of gray granite pushed up from the planet's core, their surfaces unweathered by time, untouched by life. And this world is profoundly silent. The silence we felt under the orange sky is even deeper here on the land. Listen closely, and you will hear the only sounds that exist. the whisper of a thin wind moving across the endless, empty rock. It carries no scent of flowers or damp earth, only the clean, sharp smell of minerals and ozone. Far on the horizon, you might feel a deep, low vibration, a rumble that comes from the heart of the world itself. It is the sound of a shield volcano, not erupting in violence, but steadily releasing the planet's inner heat, a slow, geological sigh. These are the only voices of the Archean land, the wind and the stone. There is no rustle of leaves, no call of a creature, no hum of an insect. It is the sound of a world holding its breath, waiting in a state of profound and patient stillness. Now, let us step from this silent land and into the great global ocean. The water is warm, heated by the geothermal energy from below, and insulated by the thick atmosphere from above. As you dip below the surface, the golden light of the orange sky filters down, creating shifting, ethereal rays in the water column. The water itself feels different. It is not the clear, salty brine of our modern seas. It is a complex chemical brew, a planetary tea steeped for 1 billion years. It is thick with dissolved minerals, especially iron, which lends the ocean its strange, olive-green color. It is a world saturated with metal, and it is in this warm, green, primordial soup that the true rulers of this ancient planet reside. For this is not a dead world, it is a living one. The life of this era is microscopic, but it is everywhere. This is the kingdom of the anaerobes, the first form of life to inherit the earth. To be an anaerobe is to exist in a world without oxygen. For them, oxygen is not the breath of life, but a consuming fire, a ghost element, a poison they have never encountered. Their entire existence, their very chemistry, is built for this world. A world of water and minerals and faint golden light. For over 1 billion years, they have been the sole occupants of this planet, and they have shaped it into a paradise perfectly suited to their needs. Their dominion is absolute, their kingdom is perfect. In the sunlit shallows, where the honey-colored light can penetrate the green water, life has built its first monuments. Vast, shallow seas are filled with strange, dome-like structures that dot the seafloor like the paving stones of a lost city. These are stromatolites, or living stones. They are built by communities of microbes, layer by microscopic layer, over thousands of years. A thin, sticky film of life traps, particles of sediment from the water, then grows up and through it, always reaching towards the light. Another layer of sediment is then trapped, and the process repeats. It is an act of creation on a geological timescale. They are living reefs, built not of coral, but of stone and time, and the patient ambition of single cells. Imagine floating over these endless, silent fields of living rock, each one a testament to the quiet, persistent power of the planet's first inhabitants. But life is not confined to the sunlit surface. Let us travel down, deep into the ocean, far below the reach of the faintest golden ray. Here, the world is one of eternal night and immense, crushing pressure. And yet, even here, life thrives in spectacular abundance. This is the world of the hydrothermal vents. Along the seams of the tectonic plates, cracks in the planet's crust bleed the intense heat and chemical energy of the Earth's mantle directly into the cold, dark water. This energy builds towering, hollow spires of minerals, great, dark cathedrals on the seafloor that shimmer with heat. From these chimneys, a dark plume of superheated water, rich in sulfur and methane, billows out into the abyss. It is the warm breath of the planet's heart, and huddled around these oases of warmth and chemistry, entire ecosystems of microbes flourish. They do not drink the light of the sun. They feast on the energy of the earth itself. It is a completely different kind of life, a second, hidden kingdom, powered by the planet's inner fire. And so, the world exists in this state of profound equilibrium. Two kingdoms of life, one on the surface, powered by the faint sun, and one in the deep, powered by the planet's core. Both are perfectly in tune with their environment. The chemistry of the ocean is stable. The haze of the atmosphere is constant. For 1 billion years, the planet has been a perfectly functioning machine, a garden cultivated by and for its simplest inhabitants. It is a world in a state of grace, a long, peaceful afternoon in the story of life on Earth. There is no hint of the catastrophe to come, no shadow of the revolution that is waiting. But deep within the genetic code of one of these humble microbes, a new idea is sleeping, a secret that once unlocked will shatter this ancient, silent peace forever. For an unimaginable length of time, the world remained in its perfect, ancient balance. 1 billion years is a number so large it loses meaning, but for the life on this planet, it was an eternity of sameness, an endless, golden afternoon. The anaerobes of the Archean world knew nothing else, and had no reason to expect a tomorrow any different from the countless yesterdays that had come before. Theirs was a kingdom built to last, but the engine of evolution never truly sleeps. It is a blind tinkerer, always working in the dark, combining old pieces in new ways, searching for an advantage, no matter how small, and in the warm, sunlit shallows of the great green ocean, it was working on its greatest and most dangerous masterpiece. The revolution did not begin with a roar, but with a whisper, inside the wall of a single, humble cell. Let us give it a name: cyanobacteria. Visually, it was unremarkable, a tiny blue-green microbe floating amongst countless others in the planetary soup. It was a descendant of the ancient phototrophs, organisms that had long practiced a simple form of photosynthesis, using sunlight to break down chemicals like hydrogen sulfide. This was a reliable but limited source of energy. It tied life to the proximity of volcanic vents or other scarce chemical resources. But this one cyanobacterium, or its recent ancestor, held a new secret within its DNA, a new piece of molecular machinery, a new recipe. This new process was a kind of alchemy, a feat of microscopic engineering that would ultimately remake the world. We call it oxygenic photosynthesis. The recipe itself was breathtaking in its simplicity and its power, for it used only the 3 most abundant ingredients on the entire planet. The first was carbon dioxide, which was plentiful in the atmosphere and dissolved in the sea. The second was sunlight, the faint, golden light that bathed the world each day, a free and limitless source of energy. And the third ingredient was the masterstroke, the key that unlocked it all: water. Simple, common HOA, the very substance of the endless global ocean. Imagine the process, a quiet miracle occurring trillions of times a second. The cyanobacterium captures a photon, a single particle of light that has traveled 90 million miles from the sun to fall upon the surface of this ancient sea. This tiny packet of stellar energy is then used to power a molecular machine that performs an incredible act. It splits a molecule of water. It tears apart the strong bonds holding the 2 hydrogen atoms and the single oxygen atom together. This act of breaking the water molecule releases a burst of energy, which the cell uses to build itself, to grow, to create more of itself. It was a pathway to almost infinite power. Life was no longer a scavenger, living off the chemical scraps of the planet. It was now a primary producer. It had learned how to drink the light of the sun and to eat the ocean itself. With this new, astonishing power, the cyanobacteria had an advantage no other life form could match. They were no longer tied to the geologic lottery of hydrothermal vents or rare minerals. Their food was everywhere. The entire sunlit surface of the planet was now their dining table. And so they began to thrive. They multiplied. Their success was quiet but absolute. Imagine a bloom that lasts for 100 million years, a slow, silent, green tide of new life creeping across the shallow coastlines, forming shimmering, oily slicks on the surface of the warm water, turning the shorelines a deeper, more vibrant shade of blue-green. They were the planet's first true pioneers, colonizing every available inch of the sunlit world. But this miracle of creation, this act of splitting water to build life, had a consequence. Every single time a water molecule was broken, a ghost was released. A single atom of a substance the cell had no use for, a waste product, a tiny puff of a gas that was, to this world, utterly alien. The ghost was oxygen. For every new cell that was built, for every bit of energy that was gained, a single atom of this potent, reactive element was exhaled into the water. At first, this was meaningless. A few trillion atoms of a new gas released into an ocean that spanned the globe. It was less than a single drop of ink in an endless sea. The cyanobacteria were not aware of their waste. They were simply living, thriving, reproducing, powered by their perfect new engine, and their collective breath, the sum of a trillion silent exhalations, began to accumulate. A slow, steady, and relentless sigh of oxygen seeping into the green, iron-rich waters of the Archean Ocean. For millions of years, this exhalation was invisible, its effects buffered by the very chemistry of the planet. But the ghost was now in the machine. The revolution had begun. The world would not know peace again for another billion years. For the waste product of this humble microbe was destined to become the most powerful and destructive force the planet had ever known. The ghost element, oxygen, was now free in the world's oceans. And oxygen is not a gentle substance. It is a restless, reactive element, driven by its atomic nature to bond with other materials, to change them, to break them down. In our modern world, we call this process oxidation. We see it in the slow browning of a cut apple, or in the consuming flames of a fire. But in the Archean Ocean, this restless element found its perfect partner, its great chemical dance. That partner was the dissolved iron that saturated the water, the very mineral that gave the ocean its deep olive-green color. Oxygen and dissolved iron cannot peacefully coexist. When they meet, they bond instantly and irrevocably, creating a new substance, iron oxide. You know it by a simpler, more common name, rust. And so, as the cyanobacteria exhaled their endless, invisible breath of oxygen, the oceans of the world began, ever so slowly, to rust. This was not a sudden, violent event. It was a slow, planetary transformation, a chemical reaction that would stretch for nearly 1 billion years. Imagine the scene, a process too slow for any single lifetime to witness, but relentless on a geological scale. In the sunlit surface waters, the tiny cyanobacteria release their puffs of oxygen. Each atom of that oxygen immediately finds an atom of dissolved iron. They bond, and a microscopic particle of rust is formed, a tiny reddish-brown speck suspended in the water. Now, multiply this by a number beyond counting, happening every second of every day for millions and millions of years. The green waters of the ancient world began to be stained with a faint reddish haze. A continuous, silent snow of rust began to fall through the water column. It was a gentle, constant, billion-year-long rain of fine, red dust, drifting from the surface, down through the twilight zones, and finally coming to rest upon the dark ocean floor. As this rust-colored snow settled, it formed a soft, red blanket over the dark, volcanic rock and the living stones of the stromatolites. Layer by microscopic layer, this blanket of oxidized iron grew thicker, a new sediment covering the old world. This process was the planet's first and greatest defense against the rising tide of oxygen. The vast reservoir of iron in the oceans acted like a planetary sponge. It soaked up the free oxygen as quickly as it was produced, pulling it out of the water and locking it away safely in the solid earth of the seabed. The planet was, in effect, cleaning up after its newest and most successful inhabitants. And as this great sponge did its work, the ocean itself began a profound transformation. The dissolved iron, the source of the water's murky, green hue, was being systematically removed. With every particle of rust that fell, the water became a little clearer. Over hundreds of millions of years, the olive-green oceans began to fade. They slowly, imperceptibly, transitioned from green to a strange, transitional brown, and then, eventually, they began to clear. The sunlight, that faint golden light from the orange sky, could now penetrate deeper into the water than ever before. This, in turn, created a feedback loop. With more light reaching greater depths, the cyanobacteria could expand their territories, colonizing new parts of the ocean. Their populations grew, and in turn, they produced even more oxygen, which accelerated the great rusting. It was a slow, self-reinforcing cycle of planetary change. And on the ocean floor, the red sediment continued to accumulate. Layer upon layer, the fine dust of iron oxide piled up. Over the immense timescale of the eons, the weight of the water above, and the slow heat from the Earth's crust would compress and cook these layers into a new and beautiful kind of rock. We call them the banded iron formations. They are some of the oldest rocks on Earth, and we can still see them today. Great bands of deep red, jasper, and dark, metallic hematite striping the ancient stone. Each red band is a testament to a time when the ocean was breathing oxygen, and each dark band is a time when it was not. They are a permanent geological record of the planet's first breaths. A beautiful, silent library written in stone, telling the story of the slow, patient death of the world's green oceans. But the sponge, vast as it was not infinite, and the cyanobacteria, in their quiet success, were relentless. A day was coming when the last atom of iron would be pulled from the water. A day when the great planetary sponge would be completely full. What would the ghost do then? For nearly 1 billion years, the great rusting of the oceans was the defining story of the planet. It was a silent, slow-motion drama, a planetary-scale chemical process that unfolded with the patience of geology itself. The success of the cyanobacteria was perfectly balanced by the vastness of the planet's iron reserves. One produced the poison, the other absorbed it. It was a temporary, but remarkably long-lived equilibrium, a precarious peace between the old world and the new. But all systems, based on finite resources, must eventually face a day of reckoning, and for the Archean Earth, that day was dawning. Imagine the final phase of this process. The last of the dissolved iron is being pulled from the water, bonding with the last available puffs of oxygen, and drifting down to form the final red layers in the great banded iron formations. The oceans are no longer green. They have become clear, perhaps for the first time in the planet's history. The faint golden sunlight now penetrates deep into the water, illuminating a world that has been scrubbed clean of its signature mineral. The great sponge is now completely saturated. It can absorb no more. The last drop of poison has been soaked up, but the cyanobacteria did not stop. Their existence was not tied to the iron cycle. Their success was tied to the sun, to the water, to the carbon dioxide in the air. Their simple, elegant engine of photosynthesis continued to run perfectly and efficiently. They were unaware of the vast chemical drama they had orchestrated. They were simply living, thriving, and multiplying in the now clear waters. And so, they continued their endless, collective breath. They continued to split water molecules, and they continued to exhale the ghost element, oxygen. But now, for the first time, when that atom of oxygen was released, it had nowhere to go. There was no free iron to bond with, no mineral sponge to soak it up. The exhalation of a single cyanobacterium, once instantly neutralized, now lingered. The tiny puff of gas remained free in the water, a single, unbound ghost. Now multiply that by the countless trillions of cyanobacteria spread across the entire global ocean. The collective sigh, which for 1 billion years had been absorbed by the sea, now began to accumulate. The water itself began to be saturated with free oxygen. Picture a glass of water slowly being filled with a dissolved gas. At first, the gas remains invisible, held in solution, but there is a limit. A saturation point is reached, and then the very next bubble that is added will rise to the surface and escape. This is what began to happen on a planetary scale. The oceans, having absorbed all the oxygen they could chemically and physically hold, could take no more, and so the oxygen, this restless, reactive gas, began its next great journey. It began to leave the water. A tiny, invisible bubble of pure oxygen, released from the ocean's surface, entered the atmosphere for the very first time. It was soon joined by another and another, a slow, steady, and irreversible leak of this new gas from the ocean into the hazy orange sky above. The great exhalation of the planet's living ocean was now venting directly into its atmosphere. The crisis, which had been contained within the water for an eon, was about to go global. The atmosphere of the Archean Earth was a thick, warm blanket, rich in methane and carbon dioxide. It was a greenhouse atmosphere, which had protected the young planet from the faintness of the young sun, keeping it warm enough for liquid water and life. But oxygen and methane cannot peacefully coexist either. Oxygen is highly reactive, and methane is a volatile hydrocarbon. When they meet, especially in the upper atmosphere, under the influence of ultraviolet radiation, oxygen attacks and destroys the methane, breaking it down into carbon dioxide and water. So, as the oxygen began to seep into the sky, it immediately went to war with the existing atmosphere. A slow, invisible chemical war began in the upper layers of the air. Each new molecule of oxygen that escaped the ocean would find a molecule of methane and destroy it. For thousands, perhaps millions of years, this process was a stalemate. The oxygen was produced so slowly that it was consumed in these reactions as quickly as it arrived. But the cyanobacteria were relentless. The leak from the ocean became a steady stream, and eventually the rate of oxygen entering the atmosphere began to overwhelm the planet's ability to neutralize it. The saturation point had been reached. The free oxygen, the ghost element, began to accumulate in the air itself. The composition of the sky was about to change, and with it, the fate of every living thing on the planet below. The saturation point had been reached, and the world was now on the brink of a transformation it could not comprehend. For over 1 billion years, the fundamental rule of life on Earth had been the absence of oxygen. The entire kingdom of the anaerobes, the silent, sprawling architects of the early planet, had built their existence upon this single, simple truth. Their chemistry, their homes, their very definition of safety was a world without the ghost element. But the ghost was no longer contained. It had escaped the ocean and was now accumulating in the air, a gathering storm of invisible chemical fire. And for the first life on Earth, the apocalypse did not come from the sky in a flash of light, nor from the depths in a tide of fire. It came as a change in the very air itself. The world they knew, the world they had curated, was about to become a betrayal. Oxygen, to us, is the gentle breath of life, but to an anaerobe, it is a catastrophic poison. On a cellular level, it is a vandal, a molecule that rips electrons from other molecules, disrupting the delicate machinery of life in a process we call oxidative stress. It was like rust, but for the very fabric of living cells. As the concentration of free oxygen in the oceans and the atmosphere began its slow, inexorable rise, the planet, for the first time, became toxic to its own inhabitants. The water they floated in, the air that touched the surface of their shallow seas, became a threat. There was no defense against it. There was no shield. It was a change in the fundamental laws of nature. The event that followed was the first, and arguably the greatest, mass extinction in Earth's history. But it was an extinction without sound, without struggle, without a trace of violence. It was a slow, planetary-scale fading. The anaerobic life that had dominated the globe for an eternity began to disappear. The vast microbial mats that carpeted the seafloor began to wither and die, poisoned by the very water that had once nourished them. The countless trillions of free-floating microbes, the lifeblood of the Archean Ocean, found their cellular walls breached and their inner workings corroded by this new, aggressive chemistry. Imagine a garden tended for 1 billion years, suddenly being watered with acid. The decline was inevitable, and it was absolute. This was a retreat, not a battle. Life did not fight back. It simply receded. The anaerobes were pushed into the shadows of their own world, into the last places the oxygen could not yet reach. They sought refuge deep within the thick, muddy sediment of the ocean floor, burying themselves away from the poisoned water. They retreated into the darkest, most isolated pockets of the abyss, far from the surface world. And they clung to life around the hydrothermal vents, in the deep darkness, where the planet's own chemical breath could keep the ghost of oxygen at bay. The surface of the world, once teeming with their quiet, microbial hum, fell into a great and profound silence. The first kingdom of life had fallen, not to a predator or a catastrophe, but to the waste product of its own evolutionary cousins. The planet had been cleansed by a silent, invisible fire, leaving it sterile and empty, waiting for a new kind of life to claim the ruins. But the catastrophe was not over. It had a second, even grander act. The rise of oxygen in the atmosphere triggered another, equally profound crisis, one that would change the very climate of the globe. Recall the hazy, orange sky of the Archean. That sky and the planet's warmth was maintained by a thick atmospheric blanket of methane. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas, far more potent than carbon dioxide, and it was this methane, produced by the ancient microbes, that had kept the Earth warm, even though the sun was younger and fainter. It was a delicate but effective planetary thermostat. As oxygen rose into the atmosphere, it began to wage its slow chemical war on this methane blanket. Molecule by molecule, the rising oxygen attacked and destroyed the methane, breaking it down into the much weaker greenhouse gases of carbon dioxide and water. The thermostat of the planet was being systematically broken. The warm, protective blanket that had shrouded the Earth for eons was being unraveled, thread by thread. And so the world began to get cold. It was a cold that crept in with geological slowness. Over thousands and millions of years, the average temperature of the planet began to fall. The warm, placid oceans began to chill. The faint energy from the young sun, no longer trapped so efficiently by the atmosphere, began to radiate back out into the coldness of space. At the poles, a phenomenon the Earth had likely never seen before began to occur: the formation of ice. First, a thin, seasonal skim of frost on the dark, volcanic rocks. Then, permanent ice caps, growing and thickening with each passing millennium. The planet was putting on a new mantle, a mantle of white. The ice caps grew, and as they grew, they reflected more of the sun's faint light back into space, which in turn made the planet even colder. It was a runaway feedback loop of refrigeration. The glaciers began their advance from the poles, great, silent rivers of ice, miles thick, grinding over the barren continents. The cooling accelerated until the planet reached a tipping point. The entire globe, from the poles to the equator, succumbed to the ice. This was the Huronian glaciation, the first and longest Snowball Earth event in our planet's history. Imagine the world now. The golden light of the orange sky has been replaced by a brilliant, harsh light, reflected off a world of endless, blinding white. The oceans are gone, locked away beneath a sheet of ice that may have been a mile thick. The silent planetary tides still pull, but now they only cause the great ice sheet to crack and groan, the only sound in a world frozen solid. It is a world of sublime, terrible beauty. A crystal planet, life, which had just been decimated by the poison of oxygen, now faced a second apocalypse of ice. But life is tenacious. In the deep, dark ocean, beneath the miles of ice, the planet's inner fire still burned. Around the hydrothermal vents, pockets of liquid water remained warmed by the Earth's core. And in these isolated, dark, and freezing refuges, life clung on. The anaerobes that had escaped the oxygen and the new oxygen-tolerant microbes survived together in these last precious oases, waiting. They were waiting for the planet's fever to break, waiting for the long, cold winter to end, a winter that would last for 300 million years. The world had been poisoned and then frozen. It seemed like the end of the story. But in truth, A new sky was being forged above the ice, and a new kind of life was waiting for the great thaw. For 300 million years, a span of time so vast it dwarfs the entire age of the dinosaurs, the Earth slept under a blanket of ice. A long, silent, and profound winter, seemingly without end. It was a period of stasis, a great pause in the planet's turbulent story. But to be paused is not to be dead. Even under the deep freeze, the fundamental engines of the world were still running, slow and patient. Deep in the planet's core, the volcanic heart still beat. Through cracks in the frozen crust, volcanoes continued to exhale, venting heat and gas, not into the air, but into the trapped, liquid oceans that still existed under the ice. This slow, steady release of carbon dioxide began to build up, a gradual reweaving of the planet's shattered greenhouse blanket, and high above, in the thin, cold, sunlit atmosphere, the slow chemical alchemy of the sun continued its work. The cyanobacteria, those resilient architects of change, huddled in the few remaining pockets of slush and water near the equator, continued their quiet breath. That breath of oxygen, slow and almost imperceptible now, continued to leak into the sky, where it was being forged into something new. High in the upper atmosphere, where the raw, unfiltered light of the sun strikes the air, the new oxygen molecules were being transformed. Under the intense, energetic bombardment of ultraviolet radiation, a special kind of oxygen molecule was being created. It was a molecule made not of 2 oxygen atoms, but 3. It was ozone. And this ozone, molecule by molecule, began to form a thin, invisible layer in the upper stratosphere. This was not a quick process. It was a silent, painstaking construction project, taking millions of years to complete. Think of it as an unseen guardian being woven into the very fabric of the sky. This new layer was a miracle of protection. It was a planetary shield, with the unique ability to absorb the most energetic and dangerous of the sun's ultraviolet rays. For over 1 billion years, this radiation had sterilized the surface of the continents, making the land a forbidden zone, utterly lethal to life. Life had always been confined to the safety of the water, which acted as a liquid shield. But now, as the world slept under its ice, a new gaseous shield was being built in the sky itself, a promise of a new frontier, a new world to conquer once the great thaw began. And the thaw was coming. The slow accumulation of volcanic greenhouse gases reached a tipping point. The atmosphere grew just thick enough to trap a little more of the sun's faint heat. The ice began to melt, not everywhere at once, but at the planet's waist, near the equator. A thin, dark blue band of open ocean appeared in the endless white. This dark water, unlike the brilliant ice, did not reflect the sunlight. It absorbed it. This absorption of heat warmed the water, which in turn melted the edges of the ice sheets. More dark water was exposed, which absorbed even more heat. The runaway refrigeration that had frozen the world was now thrown into reverse, becoming a runaway warming. The end of the great winter was not a gentle spring. It was a cataclysm of unimaginable scale. Imagine the sounds of a world breaking free. The groaning and cracking of ice sheets miles thick, breaking apart into continent-sized icebergs. The thunderous roar of the first great waterfalls, as trillions of tons of meltwater poured into newly formed chasms, carving canyons in a single season. The sound of the first rivers raging across the newly exposed rock, carrying sediment to the sea in violent, muddy torrents. The very crust of the earth, relieved of the immense weight of the ice, began to rebound, causing earthquakes that shook the newly thawed continents. After an eon of silence, the world was filled with the sound of its own violent rebirth. The earth that emerged from this great thaw was a changed world, a world reborn. Imagine seeing it for the first time. The sky was no longer a hazy, muted orange, no longer an enclosed amber room. The methane haze was gone, scrubbed from the air by the oxygen. The atmosphere was now startlingly clear, thin, and transparent. And for the first time, looking up from the surface of the earth, the sky was blue. This was not a subtle change. It was a fundamental reimagining of the world's character. The orange sky was the sky of a shrouded, secretive planet. The blue sky was the sky of clarity, of distance, of perspective. It was a window, not a ceiling. This new blue sky was a sign that the atmosphere was now fundamentally different, dominated by nitrogen, and, for the first time, a significant and stable percentage of free oxygen. The world was now irrevocably an oxygen-rich planet. The poison that had caused the Great Extinction, the element that had driven the first life into the shadows, had now become the very foundation of the new world. And in the newly thawed oceans, teeming with minerals scoured from the continents by the melting glaciers, life, which had clung on in the dark, volcanic refuges, now exploded into the light. The survivors were presented with a profound evolutionary choice. Either remain in the anaerobic shadows, a relic of a bygone age, or learn to tame the ghost, learn to harness the power of this incredibly reactive, energy-rich element. And in the crucible of this new world, a new miracle of biochemistry was forged, a process that would define the future of all complex life. It was called aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration was the perfect counterpart to photosynthesis. Photosynthesis used light to build, and in the process, released oxygen. Respiration used oxygen to deconstruct, and in the process, released energy. It was a way to control the slow, chemical fire of oxidation, to bring it inside the cell wall, and to use its immense power as a fuel source. This was a revolution on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. Anaerobic metabolism, the engine of the old world, was like a single, flickering candle, extracting a tiny amount of energy from its fuel. But breathing oxygen was like igniting a furnace. Aerobic respiration could extract nearly 20 times more energy from the same amount of food. This was the dawn of an age of energy abundance for life on Earth. The chains of scarcity were broken. With this new high-powered engine, life had the fuel to pursue radical new experiments. It could afford to become bigger, to build larger, more complex cells. It could afford the energy needed for new kinds of movement, for hunting, and for building elaborate, specialized bodies. The vast surplus of energy unlocked by oxygen allowed for the invention of the cell nucleus, a library to store more complex genetic information. It allowed for sexual reproduction, a way to shuffle that information and accelerate evolution. And most importantly, it allowed for true multicellularity, the ability for cells to stop competing and start cooperating, banding together to form a single, larger, more complex organism. The simple, solitary existence of the microbe was no longer the only path. Life was about to become a collective, an architect, a builder of bodies. The world was now prepared. The long, silent, golden afternoon of the Archean was a distant memory. The great white winter of the Snowball Earth had passed. And now, The morning of a new eon, the Proterozoic, was dawning under a brilliant blue sky. The planet was equipped with a new, clear atmosphere, a protective ozone layer, and oxygen-rich oceans. And in those oceans, a new kind of life was stirring, a life that breathed fire. The stage was set. The laboratory was open. The next billion years would be a quiet but extraordinary period of invention. The slow and steady creation of the ancestors of all animals, all fungi, and all plants. The destruction of the old world was not an ending. It was the violent, necessary, and ultimately beautiful creation of our own. And so we leave our planet on the shore of a new beginning, a world scrubbed clean by ice, painted with a new blue sky, and breathing a new energetic air. The Proterozoic eon has dawned, a long and quiet morning in the Earth's history that would last for nearly 2 billion years. This new world was a world of potential, a laboratory where life, now armed with the incredible power of aerobic respiration, could begin its greatest series of experiments. The energy was now in place for the invention of the animal, the plant, the fungus, for the evolution of movement, of thought, of consciousness. The silent, simple, and stable kingdom of the first life was gone forever. But its fall had cleared the stage for a drama of unimaginable complexity and beauty to unfold. The violent creation of our world was complete. Now, the slow and patient work of populating it could begin. But how do we know this story with such confidence? How can we speak of the color of a sky that no eye ever saw, or the composition of an ocean that has been gone for longer than complex life has existed? We know because the planet keeps a diary. Its memory is not written in ink, but in the deep, ancient layers of rock. The story of the Great Oxygenation Event is not a guess. It is a tale told by the Earth itself. If you travel to the oldest parts of our world, the great, stable shields of rock in Australia, Canada, or South Africa, you can read this diary for yourself. You can place your hand on a cool, solid outcrop of the banded iron formations. As you trace the stripes of deep red and metallic gray, you are touching the planet's fossilized breath. The red layers, rich in rust, are the exhalation, the record of a time when the oceans were full of oxygen. The gray layers are the inhalation, a time of quiet when the oxygen was scarce. They are a rhythm, a pulse, a heartbeat written in stone, telling the story of the great rusting, year by year, millennium by millennium. We can read the story, too, in the great red beds, the layers of ancient sandstone that cover so much of our planet's continents. These rust-colored rocks only appear in the geological record after a certain point in time. The point where oxygen finally saturated the seas and invaded the atmosphere. Their color is the sign of a world that had itself begun to rust, a permanent stain of the new air. And we can even read the story in what is missing. In ancient riverbeds, older than 2.5 billion years, we find deposits of a mineral called uraninite. It is a mineral that dissolves instantly in the presence of oxygen. The fact that it exists in these old rivers is definitive proof that the world before was a world without breath, a world that belonged to the anaerobes. The stones do not lie. They are the silent witnesses, the keepers of this immense and ancient truth. The legacy of this event, however, is not confined to the cold, hard memory of the rocks. Its legacy is alive. It is warm, it is breathing, and it is closer to you than you can possibly imagine. It is inside of you. At the very beginning of our journey, we started with a simple, quiet breath. Let us return to that breath now. As you lie here, resting, feel the air gently enter your lungs. That air is a mixture of gases, but the one your body seeks is that ancient ghost, oxygen. That oxygen is picked up by the iron in your blood, a beautiful and profound echo of the planet's own history. The iron in your veins, playing the same role as the iron in the ancient seas. And that oxygen is carried to every single one of the trillions of cells that make up your body. And inside each of those cells, in tiny ancient structures called mitochondria. The final act of this 2 billion-year-old story is playing out right now. The ghost is being tamed. The process of aerobic respiration, that brilliant invention born from the Great Crisis, is gently taking place. The oxygen is used to unlock the energy in the food you have eaten in a controlled, microscopic fire. This is the fire of life. The soft warmth of your own body is the heat from these countless tiny fires. The energy that allows your heart to beat, your mind to dream, and your ears to hear these words is a direct inheritance from that ancient revolution. You are breathing the legacy of the cyanobacteria. The poison that shattered the first world is now the fuel that powers your own. The story of the planet is not a foreign tale. Its chemistry is your chemistry. Its history is your history. Its breath is your breath. Let us reflect, then, on the nature of this story. It is a story of a poison, of a mass extinction, of a world frozen and remade. It is easy to cast the cyanobacteria as villains and the anaerobes as victims. But the universe does not deal in such simple terms. The cyanobacteria were not malicious. They were simply life, finding a new and brilliant way to thrive. The anaerobes were not weak. They were perfectly adapted to a world that, through no fault of their own, ceased to exist. Their story is a profound lesson in the nature of change. The planet is not a static stage on which life performs. It is a dynamic, co-evolving partner. Life changes the planet, and the planet, in turn, changes life. Destruction is often the necessary price of creation. The death of that first, simple, golden world was the terrible, but essential, prerequisite for the birth of our own complex, blue one. And so, our long journey through time is complete. We have stood under a silent, orange sky. We have watched the slow, planetary breath of the tides, pulled by a giant moon. We have witnessed an ocean rust and a planet freeze. We have seen a new world born from the ice under a new, blue sky. And we have found the echo of that entire, immense story in the quiet, simple rhythm of our own breathing. Now, there is nothing left to do but rest. Let your mind be as still as the Archean land. Let your thoughts settle like the slow red rain of rust upon the ancient seafloor. Feel the weight of your own body, a temporary and beautiful collection of stardust, powered by the fire of a tamed poison. As you close your eyes, perhaps you can imagine the great, silent winter of the Snowball Earth, a time of deep, profound, and healing rest for the entire planet. And know that, just like the world, you too will awaken, reborn in the morning. For now, just breathe, in and out. The air you breathe is a gift from a history you now know. And it is here to guide you, gently, into the quiet and peaceful dark. Rest now, sleep now.